Hi, Emily. Thank you for joining us tonight virtually. Shabbat Shalom. It's great to have you. I have to say off the bat, and my congregants have heard this, I love the book. I thought it was one of the better retellings of American Jewish history for the last 100 years. I studied with a lot of those people that you quoted and also felt very much part of those movements, and a lot of those experiences washed over me. What made you decide to write a book like this?
Well, first of all, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for having me virtually, and thank you for those kind words about the book. So my villain origin story, as I've called it for this book, is that my last book was about George Soros, and one of the things that comes up a lot when you spend time reporting on or thinking about talking about George Soros is, well, he's not really Jewish. And so therefore conspiracy theories about him, and I don't mean criticisms, I mean like conspiracy theories and attacks, they're not really anti-Semitic because look at his relationship to Israel, he doesn't go to shul, etc. And this really bothered me. And then, I mean, I sort of sat with it and thought, well, am I bothered about Soros or am I bothered about me in my own life and what I've been holding on to? And also I should say that I wrote this book, or this happened during the Trump years, which were still in some ways. And I don't mean that, I'm not trying to be like too political or too partisan, but it was this moment where it felt like people were constantly just throwing going across the political aisle at one another. You have this moment where you have a president who makes what I consider to be anti-Semitic remarks, then turn around and say, well, why aren't the Jews voting for me? I moved the embassy, etc. So we have this political moment. We have these broader questions about like who counts as as a Jewish person, as a legitimate target of anti-Semitism. And I thought it might be interesting to put this unique moment in its context and see if this was perhaps not one in a series of unique moments that we could use to better understand where we are and maybe where we're going. And I'll also just say that I really struggled with at first whether or not I should write this book. And I read this in the introduction. You know, my own upbringing was very secular. I didn't have a bat mitzvah. I don't speak Hebrew. I had not been to Israel before writing this book. And for all these reasons, I was like, well, maybe somebody should write this book, but it shouldn't be me. And basically what I thought, I sort of caught myself and was like, well, wait a minute. You know, if somebody else said that about themselves, you wouldn't just say, I disagree. You would say, I think this is the wrong mental framing. Like, of course, you need to be aware and knowledgeable and do your homework in order to know what you're talking about, what you're writing about. But this idea that like, if I just hit enough boxes, you know, I'll be Jewish enough to have a stake in this. I really disagree with that. And so thus we have bad Jews.
So what you're referring to is what I usually call authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
and you did use that word a few times. So part of your book, it sort of seems like the bookends of your book are about the issues of who qualifies, who's authentic, but then inside the major content, the majority of the content about the history, which goes back before my time, but certainly to people that were part of my life, I know your father is a similar age to me,
Mm-hmm.
part of his life. What about that history that you drew surprised you, or seemed to be most significant?
I think that, how to put this? I think that there are sort of two parallel things happening within American Jewishness, certainly over the past 100 years. One is how do we make sense of ourselves with each other? And the other is how do you render yourself legible to the broader United States? And it was the latter that sort of not surprised me, but that I thought perhaps we don't consider enough. I think that this country understands race and religion really well. I think the United States understands ethnicity and culture less well. And all of this, you see all of this play out as Jews try to understand, like, who am I in the United States? And you see it today when you hear people say, like, well, you hear anti-Semites say, well, I don't have a problem with Jews. I just have a problem with like people with Jewish last names or these secular Jews in Hollywood. And it's like, well, wait a minute. If you go back and look at American history, that is a major part of the American Jewish tradition as well. And I also think one of the things that I've gotten some pushback on since this, not pushback, but just people have kind of, I think, had a hard time wrapping their minds around, is the whiteness of Jews, or of many Jews that I unpack in this, or try to unpack in this book. And I just want to say that one of the things that this book comes back to again and again, because it's a book set in the United States, is American Jewish history as it relates to race and racism in this country, and the extent to which most American Jews were able to, and I don't mean this in a malicious way, but did take advantage of, I mean, in some cases malicious, but often not, right? But like did take advantage of America's understanding of race as legally codified. And I just want to make clear sort of at the top of this discussion that I'm not saying that means that there wasn't anti-Semitism or that Jews, haven't been on the receiving end of white supremacy. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that under the law, most American Jews in this country have been considered white and have benefited from that.
And culturally too. That was actually of all the things in the book, I was very familiar with much of the history and also some of the discussions about authenticity. That was the part that I really, I found the most educational for myself. While I highly recommend the book as educational for many, many people, that was a piece of it that having explored this topic and having experienced it myself, and watched the debates and discussions and arguments about, are we white, are we not white? I really like the way that you concretized it, the way that you described it in an historical sense. As somebody near and dear to me frequently says, it's how you navigate the world, and navigate the United States, which is our world, as white people. And
again, I think it goes back to this country really, only understands race much better than it does ethnicity, and not that obviously there are many ethnicities that Jewish people are, and that are many ethnicities that comprise Jewishness. But I think one of the interesting things that in trying to wrap my own mind around American Jewishness is that, these conversations that have been happening for a century, or, at least, but my book deals with a century. How do I understand myself, and how can I make the country understand who I am? And do those two things always align?
The idea of peoplehood is very attractive to me, partly because it sort of partakes in ethnicity in a kind of classical way, and also because it's really vague.
Yeah,
it creates a sense of connection, even as some of my more down to earth, I guess earthbound, grounded colleagues say, well, it's not necessarily true, because humanistic Jews are very obsessed with what's true in the world, because that's part of our whole theological discussion about God and that kind of thing. But it is true for me in the sense that I feel connected to Jews, and you sort of made that point at the end of the book. I think it was right before the conclusion. You were arguing with someone, and maybe I saw it in an interview that you did too. But this idea that we have many communities, but we are all in some ways in communion with each other.
I really loved the Rabbi Buchdahl quote where she encourages that I believe she was giving a sermon. She was encouraging those listening to think about Jewishness like a family. And what she meant was that people come into a family differently. Some are born into it, some marry into it. You have family members who look different from you. What I really like about this analogy is that I don't like all my family members all of the time. You know what I mean? Like there are cousins who I'm not on particularly good terms with. There are, maybe you have like the aunt that you haven't spoken to in a while, but you're still family, right? And the fact that you don't have Shabbat dinner together doesn't change that. There are Jewish people with whom I disagree very profoundly, who I don't want to, celebrate the high holidays with, but I can recognize that we're both Jewish, and that exactly as you say, that there is a communion in that.
The idea of there being bad and good Jews is something that, it does relate to family. You can say you're a good member of our family or a bad member of family. You carry on our traditions or you don't. Do you feel that there are some political divisions among Jews in this country, I guess across the world too, that are irreparable? Or unbridgeable, maybe would be a way to put it.
I mean, I think that if they are going to be bridged, they're going to be farther apart before that happens, right? I think if you look at the divisions between Jewish people in this country and around the world, I sort of don't think that this is like next week we're going to come together and hold hands. I think that there are really some profound differences that are going to be articulated and fought over, and actually I think that is preferable to the, I mean, to me, is preferable to the alternative, which is people giving up, well, I guess maybe people who I agree with, giving up what they think is moral and valuable in order to make it seem like everyone agrees. I've had some conversations where, because I put forth quite a, I've said that this book is a love letter to Jewish pluralism, and I've had some people say to me, well, then how can we rally against anti-Semitism? Which is a fair question, but my questions in response are, we don't even all agree on, to your point about divides, we don't even all agree on the definitions of anti-Semitism. So what are we, rally for what? And also, like, when in American Jewish history have we all rallied over anti-Semitism? There were divisions over how to approach, more restrictive immigration policies. There were divisions over how to approach World War II and refugees. During the Red Scare era, the McCarthy era, mainstream Jewish organizations opened their rolls and said, "Here are the people we think are socialist sympathizers." Like, was that rallying? I mean, when has that ever happened? And so the fact that there are more people now who are comfortable saying, actually, I disagree with that big organization, or actually, I think perhaps this is a more meaningful way to explore being Jewish. Yes, there is a risk, but I think it also comes with, it could come with profound rewards as well. And I think that one of the things that I try to communicate in this book is that, so often I think you hear, like, this is the end of American Jewishness, like, everybody's like, nobody's distinctive anymore, or like, we're all fighting and we're all just going to be fighting forever. And one of the things that was useful to me in writing this book was saying that, yes, that's true, but it's always been true, at least for the last century, right? Like, basically, American Jews got here in large numbers and immediately looked to where they had just been, said, that was the more authentic place, and also, I disagree with you about how to be Jewish in America, right? Like, this has been going on, and I think will continue to go on, and will look different than it does now, but that's, in my opinion, that's okay, right? That's not a fundamental threat to Jewishness.
There is this nostalgic Judaism. Now, you kind of praise nostalgic Judaism. Our founder, Rabbi Sherwin Wein, he didn't love nostalgic Judaism because he felt that it wasn't a good tool to convey the values that we really hold. And so he was very much about, our beliefs being consistent with our practices.
Yes. Which I agree with. So I actually was doing a talk at my own synagogue recently and got a question that was, how can you like poke fun at American Jews for always looking back and saying, well, that was more authentic, and also say, there's a book that I really recommend to people. It's Rachel B. Gross's Beyond the Synagogue, and it's about nostalgia as a form of religious worship. And my answer then, which is my answer now, because it was only a week ago, was that I actually think that these two things are, I think, living in the present and appreciating the present, and also having a respect for the past, like, those two things to me are in tandem, right? If I go to a city in Europe or to a city here in America and look for the Jewish quarter or the Jewish sites and try to take in that history, it's not that I'm wishing that I lived like that, or that I thought that was more Jewish. It's understanding that there's a connection, that, again, Jewishness is a lot of things, but one of the things that is or can be is this incredibly rich history that you can take from and use to inform your values and your life, to, like,
Yeah, I see a place for nostalgia too, and I liked how you spoke about how, for instance, doing genealogy, Jewish genealogy could be a form of Jewish practice. I was thinking more about how we make choices today about what we're doing Jewishly, because I think even Rabbi Wein would have said there's a legitimate place for Jewish nostalgia. He was born in the 1920s and came out of this conservative background and decided he was a secular humanist, or a religious humanist, however he would have termed it. Do you feel that the lack of, I know you belong to a Reform synagogue. I grew up in the Reform movement, was all over the place Jewishly, and I have Orthodox children and Orthodox grandchildren, very modern. And I'm queer and I have a husband. So do you find that that belief plays any or much of a role in your Jewish, or in the landscape of Jewish behavior now? It's something we talk about in my movement a lot.
So two things. There is much talk of how, this, and I write about this in the book, like this, the 2020 Pew study came out and it was like, do you believe in the God of the Bible? And a bunch of people said no. And people, I think, rightly pointed out that that's not, this idea of like, do you have faith or do you not, is not a particularly Jewish framing of the question, which I agree with. And so I think it can, it can look different to different people. And I think that's true of me as well. I do not think that I would have joined a synagogue if I had not written this book. And did I join to be honest, did I join for religious reasons? No, I didn't. I joined because I was doing interviews and I was like, well, this sounds really nice. Like I would like to be in a community like this. But as you go and you sit there, you think like, oh, actually there's this whole other element that I didn't really consider a part of my life that can be now. So now I would say that yes, belief does have a role in my Judaism. But I also think that I also don't think that I'm any more Jewish now than I was before I started going to synagogue. You know what I mean?
I do. So the one, and this wasn't something you wrote, this was Danya Ruttenberg, who I have the most respect for. She's an incredible leader in the Jewish community, especially in reproductive rights, which are so important to us in our movement. But she said that that was a non-Jewish question, Christian question, I think, is what she said. And I have to say I disagree with that, because number one, it's offensive to Christianity, which also has lots of layers of, they have the God of Augustine and the God of this one and the God of the other, the God of Martin Luther King, for that matter. We're recording this, we're on the eve of that weekend. Whereas the executive director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, he really glommed onto that question in the Pew survey, because what we're trying to demonstrate to people is that there's a way to do Jewishness without God, and I think some people do care about it a great deal. Certainly, I have 200 families that seem to care about it a great deal.
Yeah. No, and I think, yes, there's a very strong, not just strong past, but
I'm not asking you to defend Rabbi Ruttenberg.
I sort of do agree that the idea of like, do you believe in God, yes or no, is a complicated one for it's a complicated question for a lot of Jews, because I had one interviewee say to me, well, I'm not spiritual at all, but I am religious, which I thought was very funny, or I've had people say, the God I don't believe in is Jewish, or that like the secular and the sacred are two parts of the same whole in Jewish identity, because it is an ethnicity and a culture and a religion. So that's what I mean when I say, like, I think just looking at it as a binary is not totally useful for many people who are Jewish. Having said that, yes, there are Jewish people who are like, I'm totally secular. And that's very clearly also a part of not just the American Jewish tradition, but the Jewish tradition. And not just the tradition, but the present.
Right. Now you're meeting today, and I'm sure you've met others, an atheist who's very spiritual. So that's part of the continuum of what we do. I actually wasn't intending to open the door quite that much to that conversation, but as it happens, that was a little area where the needle in the record kind of got stuck for me, was over Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg's, because, one could say that there's also the God of Carl Sagan. And when I said belief, I meant political belief too. So let me go back there.
Oh, sure. I'll just say, and I said this to my own synagogue. I have spoken to people. I know this is a very not polarizing, but people feel strongly about this. I've spoken to people who feel very strongly that there is no place for politics in Judaism. They've quit their congregations over this. They don't want to hear it. To me, I like going to the synagogue that I go to in part because they do bridge religious belief and political belief. And I don't mean political parties, right? But I mean like the values of your day-to-day life. And like, to me, part of what's useful and comforting about this is that it can help you navigate life, like society and politics. And I personally, in my own life, don't see how you could separate the two. So yes, I think belief in you said grounded earlier, belief in the more like here and now political societal sense is a huge part of what being Jewish is to me. And if you go back to the Pew study, younger Jews say the most important, like to them, being Jewish is social justice.
and I think about some of the, now I'm not talking about Orthodox people like I have in my family, but to the much, much further right in the Haredi world,
Mhm.
you know, who actually don't even call us Jews, they call us Tikkun Olamists.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. People who are people who are like, well, that's not Judaism, that's just progressivism. It's like, okay, you know, like that's fine. You could. This is sort of where I am with this now. It's like if you want to say that, sure. It doesn't actually have any bearing over my life. All you're doing, and this is one of the sort of key takeaways of the book, is like you're not actually winning an argument if you do that. You're just closing the circle of debate so that you don't have to engage with what I'm saying, which is fine. Like that's totally your prerogative. There's a Jewish precedent for that too. I won't say that you're not being Jewish. I'll just say I think this is not how I personally choose to navigate my own Jewish life, which I have, which you can't take away from me by saying that I'm like actually just a progressive or just a tikkun olamist or like whatever else.
I'm actually okay with it because, you know, once personally I took on humanistic Judaism, I decided the values that I was going to follow were going to be universal humanistic values.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that was the community that I was going to look to for values discussions. But then I was going to try to look to Jewish tradition and belonging and rituals and what have you as ways to convey those where it works. It doesn't work in many cases. There's
right. So actually, I have a question for you, if that's
sure.
okay, which is that, you know, there are some people who I've interviewed who are like, I really don't like it when Jews say, and these are Jewish people who are like, I don't like it when Jews say that to them being Judaism to them being Jewish is tikkun olam, because that's, you know, actually that was about clearing the world of false idols. And also other people also believe in social justice, and being Jewish doesn't automatically make you a good person. We shouldn't pretend that. And I'm curious as to what your thoughts on all of that are.
Well, I believe people have to choose their belief system in some ways, independent of their, you know, their ethnic and tribal attachments. You know, I grew up in a world that Jewish identity was very much linked to Zionism, much as you described it in the book, which was, you know, really hit home to read those pieces where you were reading my mind and my life, and us not having that because I just happened to be around, you know, in that time, intermarriage talk, whatever it was. And at some point, I came to the conclusion that, you know, and maybe it's because I speak Hebrew, maybe it's because I'm a rabbi and I'm, you know, so involved in Jewish life all the time, even as a humanist, but that I had to really separate or choose which of the Jewish teachings were going to be the ones that were authoritative for me. And ultimately, I found that they were all the ones that jibed with humanism. And then the fact that I didn't believe in God and I wasn't interested in playing Rabbi Ruttenberg's game of the God of Rashi and the God of this one and the God of other one, because I just don't believe in the supernatural, that this was a good place to land for me. And what it does is I find that many Jews are humanistic, for, you know, the God part notwithstanding. I don't think it's the biggest piece of our message. It's just how we conduct our rituals. But that looking at what humanism had to offer, and it's, you know, it's a progressive worldview. Looking at what humanism had to offer and wanting to still be part of my Jewish family, that this presented an opportunity for that. And humanism doesn't ask you to give up your attachments. Right. It does ask you to recognize that every human is like every other human. You know, my colleagues say because we're made in the image of God. That's interesting and nice language for them. For me, it's because, you know, we all evolved from the same cell, and ultimately, you know, speciated into Homo sapiens. And that's my way of looking at it. And if they want to talk about it with God doing it, that's fine. Right. Yeah. But for me, humanism is the guiding philosophy. And we talk about our philosophy all the time. We talk about our beliefs all the time, our humanistic beliefs. But we do it in the context of the high holidays and Purim and this one and that one, because we still love our culture. So that's the short answer that maybe my congregants listening right now are not as interested in hearing me say for the 4 millionth time. But well, sorry to the congregants. No. That's no. But it's also an opportunity for dialogue. For patiently. No. They listening. They love talking about beliefs. It's really kind of heartwarming because when I was a Reform rabbi and when I was a community rabbi, I found that we had to be very careful. And you do a good job in the book of talking about, those sort of sore points.
Mm-hmm.
And Reform Judaism has struggled because it's a very progressive movement. You have the Religious Action Center, which I love, and is one of the greatest, I think, creations of the Reform movement. And at the same exact time, you have people saying you can't say bad things about Trump.
Yeah, I think how to put this, liberal Jews more broadly, not just in the Reform movement, but just as a, I think, there were, for example, groups that were very comfortable being more openly pro-choice, and now that that's become a partisan issue, are not comfortable with that anymore. Do you believe in this or not? Right? Like the fact that one party is now more extreme, does that mean that you don't think that people have a, right to reproductive choice anymore? I think that, to borrow from Sean McGee, I think the Zionization of American Jewry was a real phenomenon that people are struggling with now. And imagining an American Jewish communal life, like national communal life, that doesn't center that. I think people were first working through whether or not they think it should center that, and second, if it doesn't, what are American Jews? I think people are having a tough time, particularly at the organizational leadership level, which, I've said this before, so I'll say it here. I do think that we're going to continue to see a gulf between American Jewish communities and a friend of mine called it Big Jewish, like the American Jewish mainstream establishment organizations, and we'll see where that takes us. But to your point, I do think that we, not to be like we live in a society, but we do. And part of American Jewish identity has always been, it has never just been navigating religion. It has always been navigating politics and race and class and international politics. Like that has always been a part of the American Jewish story, including now.
Let's just for one moment talk about the Zionization of American Judaism. Mm-hmm. Your history of that is spot on. What do you see as, and you didn't address this too much in the book, so I'm very curious. What do you see as the relationship between the two largest populations of Jews right now in Israel and in America going forward?
Yeah, what I've said to some people is that even if so most American Jews are liberal, maybe not progressive, but like liberal minded. Even if most Israeli Jews were as well, they would still be two different countries, right? Sure. With two different populations who are not the same and do not have the same experiences. And that is not what happened. So that is not the political trajectory that most Israeli Jews have taken. First of all, most people are just not engaged on this issue. 55% of American Jews have never been to Israel. So I half joked that before I wrote this book, I had never been. And actually, I was more representative of American Jews then than I am now. I've been twice, which I think like 20% of American Jews have. And of the American Jews who are engaged, I think particularly, you have, it goes back to what we were saying about polarization within and also between countries. I think there is a population here in the United States that is much more right-leaning, that, is not going to criticize Israel, is not going to break with Israel, likes this new government. But I think increasingly most American Jews are going to struggle with reconciling the fact that they consider themselves to be liberals and with the fact that they are Zionists and used to not think twice about saying that. And what does that mean for their relationship to Israel, to American Jewishness, to themselves? Right? Like if you listen to somebody say that this current government is the natural continuation of policies that were already in place, and you supported the policies that led to this point, but you hate this government, like what does that mean? So again, I think that it will be, I just don't think there's any way to paint over this. It's not in a good place right now. That's true with respect to the treatment of Palestinians and Palestinian rights and dignity. And it's true to how Israeli Jews and American Jews talk about each other, which is not like, I don't think that's the main issue. I think American Jews have a stake in the conversation, are a part of the conversation, but it's not. I also want to, like, it's not first and foremost about us. It's about Israelis and Palestinians. But to the extent that it is about us, it's also not good there, right? So, I think too, the gap gets wider before it gets narrower, maybe at some point. And again, like, that's not. I think that is preferable to the alternative, which is pretending like actually this is fine.
Yeah. Exactly. It's very, very difficult to pretend that it's fine, especially when you see what's going on right now with judicial reform in Israel and that kind of thing. The only democracy in the Middle East, quote unquote, is turning into a country that's looking a lot more like Hungary than it's looking like the United States or some of our friends in the European Union. The one other thing that I did want to touch upon is just taking us a little bit away from that. But I never remembered in the history of my Jewishness, 60 years now on this planet, Gentiles, non-Jews, completely making judgments about my Jewishness, whether it's Trump or McCain, Meghan McCain, or Rudolph Giuliani. Talk a little bit of how you treat that in the book, because I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, and at first, I think it's pretty clear from this conversation that I myself am, I consider myself progressive, but I really do try in this book to give everyone, to present the fairest version of every
You did, argument. Yeah.
So all of that said, I think that when you have a group of people in the American Jewish world who are willing to say those people aren't really Jewish, we're the people who are really Jewish, you will also find people who are not Jewish who are happy to use that point to protect themselves from criticisms of anti-Semitism, right? So now they're free to engage in Soros conspiracy theories. They're free to talk about Hollywood and the media, and they don't have to feel bad. I mean, they should feel badly about it, but right, they can say, well, like, these guys said that we're good. I mean, you brought up Hungary earlier. You hear the same thing from Hungarian diplomats who say, well, we have a kosher stamp from Bibi Netanyahu.
Right.
And like the fact that you can support Israel and be an anti-Semite, and in fact, lots of people manage that every day, So I think that's what's going on there. I mean, I think it's sort of the label is used between, firstly, most often used toward the self,
right,
which comes from somewhere, right? It comes from other Jews, and then it's also used from people who are not Jewish who watch this phenomenon and think, oh, maybe I can kind of get in on that to be very frank, for political gain.
I actually have to say I was baffled by this. I knew there were plenty of people who were not progressive or liberal who supported Israel, Christians United for Israel, for instance. I must say I was surprised to see Jews defending real anti-Semitism by stating, well, this group supports Israel. When I was growing up, we always knew they supported Israel for maybe not so philo-Semitic reasons. And I think you did a fabulous job of explaining it.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's a political union. And so I think, unfortunately, people are willing to sacrifice some things for that, including what I consider to be pretty important things, right? Like, there are people who I agree with politically, who I wouldn't, who I would criticize for dealing in anti-Semitic tropes. So it's a shame, but it's where we are now, and because it's where we are now, we should be able to say it. I think I actually don't think that people saying anti-Semitism out loud is good. Like, I think it's bad. We should try to get back to the place where we're not doing that. But the one good thing about the fact that people are now just using the word Jew and Jewish instead of these little, like, instead of globalist or cabal, right? And then, by stripping away the layer of plausible deniability, I hope that we can now go and say, okay, well, that was bad. And also all these people who are saying the same things with slightly different language, like, that's also bad and anti-Semitic. And we see what you're doing.
I just want to, again, thank you for the book, because I think you've captured something here that has managed to put an historical perspective and a modern kind of update on so many of the trends that have been going on, not just among Jews in America, but I think all over the Jewish world. Though your concentration on America was obviously the entree for that. So thank you so much for the book. Someday maybe you'll come visit us here in
yeah, I would love to.
Michigan.
And thank you, and your congregation for the time. I really appreciate it. And again, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.